Good day, folks. Everything new under the sun. I was going to do a video about Ezekiel 38 and how there could be an economic collapse hidden in its verses, or maybe not hidden at all. I spoke of Isaiah 17 and how it appears that there is likely to be an economic downturn. At the very least, I would suggest an economic collapse, which is part and parcel, leading to or the cause of Isaiah 17, or something that happens in conjunction with it. And also we know in Revelation chapter 6, I believe it is, that it speaks of some of the punishments poured out upon the earth. And part of that is famine. And I think Ezekiel 38 speaks to and is in parallel with, in many ways, Isaiah 17. Ezekiel 38 obviously being Gog-Magog marching on Israel. Isaiah 17 being the destruction of Damascus as a city. And then the famine that comes along. And maybe that famine that comes along is triggered by the economic collapse that happened maybe a year, maybe 6 months earlier, whatever amount of time, maybe 3.5 years, wink, wink, ahead of the wrath that God pours out on the earth, and maybe likely we're still in the economic collapse. But I want to read this chapter and, again, look at it from the point of view of an economic collapse. If you look at it through an economic collapse lens, can you see economic collapse in there? Can you see a monetary reason why Gog-Magog would march on Israel? And I think it's absolutely true that Gog-Magog marches on Israel, and one of the big reasons is economic, because there's a spoil to take. We're going to read that. So I'm going to start reading here. And the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, set thy face against Gog, the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshach and Tubal, and prophesy against him, it says. And say thus, saith the Lord, Behold, I am against thee, O Gog, the chief prince of Meshach and Tubal, and I will turn thee back and put hooks, plural. There's more than one thing that causes Gog and Gog-Magog to turn on Israel: the alliance of nations, Turkey, Iran, Persia, Libya, Ethiopia, etc. There's multiple things that turn them back. One of them is their agreement with Persia, Iran, in terms of going to war against Israel. Another of them, which is spoken of in verses further down, which we're going to look at, is because there's a spoil to be taken. There's riches, there's money, there's food, there's lots of good things in Israel. And I will submit to you that I think it's possible that an economic collapse happens, and that's really the trigger point. And that is why Gog-Magog and those nations go march on Israel. They see abundance in Israel while there is economic collapse happening. Because certainly right now, Russia isn't in desperate need of food. The countries of the Middle East aren't in desperate need of spoil, gold, silver. They've got lots of oil, and so far, so good. We're not in any economic collapse of any sort. No shortage of food by any stretch, although Iran may be in a huge shortage of food soon with all the floods that are occurring there. Probably some judgment on them for calling on the death and destruction of Israel. But anyways, let's continue reading here. And I will turn thee back and put hooks into thy jaws, and I will bring thee forth, and all thine army, horses and horsemen, all of them clothed with all sorts of armor. Now you look at this from an actual point of view of there being horses, horsemen, all of them clothed with all sorts of army, and all sorts of armor, rather. A literal view, that's the word I was looking for. If you take a literal view of this, you say, well, people don't ride horses anymore, and there's, we don't have horses, we don't have people who ride them, and we don't have a lot of, armor like they did back in the day. We drive tanks these days, we drive helicopters, etc. Much less is there people walking around with armor. But it says, even a great company with bucklers and shields, and specifically says bucklers and shields. All of them handling swords specifically. Why use those specific terms if it's supposed to be a vague reference to modern technology? Why wouldn't they use more generalized terms relating to that? Why specify shields and swords and horses and horsemen? And you got to ask that question. And often when you take the Bible literally, the more literally you take it, the more it ends up being true. In these last days, I will posit this. If an economic collapse happens, if the world goes into complete turmoil, worldwide economic crash, there's no money to get oil out of the ground anymore, so there's no oil for tanks, they would have to revert to horses and horsemen, and maybe even swords. Maybe even there's such an economic collapse that people aren't making bullets anymore, so they literally have to go back to it. You got to look at it from that point of view, a literal point of view, and say, is that a possibility? Would an economic collapse or some other worldwide event actually allow that to come true? Certainly, wouldn't it be interesting if the Bible was exactly fulfilled as it spoke of, literally with the words, and that would be interesting to see. Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya with them, all of them with shield and helmet. Again, specific reference to pieces of armor, offensive, defensive. Gomer and all his bands, the house of Togarmah, and the north quarters, all of his bands, and many people with him. Be thou prepared, and prepare thyself, thou and all thy company that are assembled unto thee, and be thou a guard unto them. After many days, so in the last days, after many days, after 2,000 years worth of days, in the latter years, we are in the latter years and in the latter days, thou shalt come into the land, brought back from the sword. That's when Israel's back in the land, and gathered out of many people. The Jews were amongst people of the world. They were in every country, and they were being gathered together with Aliyah, the free flight home that Israel offers to all Jews who want to live in Israel. It says, and is gathered out of many people against the mountains of Israel, which have been always waste. So this is a land that was wasted, that wasn't really used by anybody other than a few nomads here and there for sheep herding. This was a land that wasn't a specific country, etc. It had been laid waste. It was a desert, effectively. But it is brought forth out of the nations. So Israel came out of the nations and made their own nation in one day, 1948. And they shall dwell safely, all of them. Now the question here is, are they dwelling safely now? You could argue in one manner they are, because they have the IAF, the IDF, protecting them. On the other hand, there always is the potential of missile attacks. And so really they're not dwelling safely in the truest sense of the term. So does this maybe come after there's some initial peace agreement? And that's a question you got to ask when you're taking these verses literally. Will they dwell safely, all of them, in the land? And they really haven't since 1948. They've never been safe there. So again, this speaks to a time when there's apparent peace in the land, and they certainly aren't in a peaceful state right now. Thou shalt ascend and come like a storm, and that certainly sounds like aircraft, fighter jets. Thou shalt be like a cloud to cover the land, thou, all thy bands, and many people with thee. That also seems to, I see pictures in my mind of missiles flying through the air, aircraft, like a cloud. And many people with thee. Thus saith the Lord God, it shall come to pass that at the same time shall things come into the mind, and thou shalt think an evil thought. Now what does that mean exactly? And thou shalt say, I will go up to the land of unwalled villages. Maybe this is Gog, of Magog, and the allied nations having an evil thought and saying, you know what? Time is tough. The world economy has collapsed. We have no food. And it looks like Israel has everything. They are so blessed as a nation. We're going to march on Israel. I will go up to the land of unwalled villages. Do they have walls right now? They certainly do have walls. So again, this speaks of, and many people think that this speaks of a time where the walls are torn down. Could it be after a peace deal is put in place, and the walls come down? Maybe part of the peace deal, the walls come down. It's going to be interesting to see if there's any reference to the word wall or the idea of walls in Israel in terms of the Trump's deal of the century, and also the timeline of the deal of the century. Will there be a moratorium on changes for 7 years while they work out the final status of Jerusalem? You have to ask all these questions and say, what is in here? And at this point in time, Kushner himself is saying that it's going to come out in June after Ramadan. It shall come to pass at the same time an evil thought. There should be an evil thought. I will go up to the land of unwalled villages. I will go to them that are at rest, that dwell safely, all of them dwelling without walls. That's certainly not the case right now. To take a spoil, to take a prey, to turn thine hand upon the desolate places that are now inhabited. So that's the rebuilding of Israel. Absolutely, that's easy. and upon the people that are gathered out of many nations. Which people in the whole world are gathered out of many nations? And that would be the Jewish people. Sheba and Dedan and the merchants of Tarshish with all the young lions thereof say unto thee, art thou to come take a spoil? Hast thou gathered thy company to take a prey, to carry away silver and gold, to take away cattle and goods? What is that? They're taking away money and they're taking away food. Is that because the world economy has collapsed and now they're collecting that which is still worth money, not paper dollars, but gold and silver? And they're taking the food, the cattle? Therefore, son of man, prophesy and say unto Gog, thus saith the Lord, in that day when my people of Israel dwell safely, shall thou not know it? So when Israel thinks they are safe, finally, once and for all, that's when Gog Magog pounces. And again, I think it happens to be when there is an economic collapse, has been an economic collapse, maybe they're in the middle of it, when this is actually fulfilled. It says, and thou shalt come from thy place out of the north part. So you talk about the north parts, north of Israel, being Turkey, Russia, Syria, even Iraq, Iran. You could consider them, because Iraq, Iran were the same country years ago. And thou shalt come up against my people as a cloud to cover the land. It shall be in the latter days, the last days that we are in, and I will bring thee against my land, that the heathen may know me. What is this done for? Why does anything happen? For the glory of God, so that God can be showed ultimately in the end that he is God, he is sovereign, he controls everything, he allows things to happen, sometimes for a reason, for a purpose, but God knows everything that's happening, and he uses it for his glory and his purposes. So that the heathen may know, when I shall be sanctified in thee, O Gog, before their eyes. He's going to use their defeat to point them to him. And again, you got to look at the Israeli nation. Remember, it's not the Christians who need to be pointed to him necessarily. It's the Jews who missed the Messiah 2,000 years ago. It's the Jews that need to be pointed towards God. So he's going to use Gog Magog to point the Jews towards God. So another reason to think that this is after the Christians are gone. Something to think about. You talk about pre-trib rapture, pre-wrath rapture. Where do they occur on this timeline? I think we don't know exactly when all these things are going to be fulfilled. All we know is that they will, because history dictates and confirms that all the prophecy otherwise has been fulfilled exactly according to what was written, and to the exact day and hour, just like Jesus' birth, burial, and resurrection, and marching into Jerusalem as the Lamb, with the palm leaves spread out in front of him, as a king on a donkey, etc. All these prophecies were fulfilled on the day, very, very specifically, and in great detail. It says, and it shall come to pass at the same time when Gog shall come against the land of Israel, saith the Lord God, that my fury shall come up in my face. For in my jealousy and in the fire of my wrath have I spoken. Surely in that day there shall be a great shaking of the land of Israel. And that speaks to a great earthquake in that day. Does that shaking, does that line up with the great shaking where the sun and the moon goes dark? And is that actually where the wrath of God is turned on, if you will, in the world? That is the moment in time where we switch from the 3.5-year tribulation to the 3.5 years of wrath of God in that 7-year period. Something to think about. Other parallels to look into and to put side by side with other scriptures relating to the 7-year period, the return of the Lord, exactly when is he going to return, and lining up this great shaking with the great earthquake and the sun and the moon going dark as sackcloth, speaking of the great day of the Lord. So lots of interesting things here, but I think the keys are that it makes sense that they're coming to carry away gold and silver. Why? Probably because they need it. Probably because an economic collapse has occurred. That would be a very good reason for this happening. They certainly don't need gold and silver right now, although anybody wants more gold and silver and more cattle. But again, it doesn't seem like they need it right now. You would think they would have to be in desperate straits, in a desperate situation where it would convince them enough to pull them down to march on Israel and bring really the wrath of the world against them, if the world was willing to at this time. Remember that Western nations aren't reflected in these scriptures. You don't see the United States of America. You don't see Canada. You don't see Australia. You don't see Europe in any country in Europe. You don't see them here, and I propose to you that it's because an economic collapse has already occurred. It has taken all those nations out. They are fighting for their own survival. The governments have collapsed, and Russia, the economy of the world has collapsed, and so Russia and allied nations say, we're starving, the economy has collapsed, we need real money, and when the economy collapses, we all go back to gold and silver. And so what they're going after in Israel is the gold and silver, the real money. And so I think all of this points to the fact that an economic collapse has just occurred, and that's why there's no Western nations, and that's why Russia is marching. They want to collect some of the gold, and they're starving too because of the economic collapse, and they want to take all the food from Israel as well as the allied nations that are with them. So that's what I think is going on in Ezekiel 38. That's my speculation. Hope that was interesting. Let me know what you guys think about those ideas. And I will leave it there. As always, guys, thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys in the next video.